It was in the 1970s that I first went to India to teach at a Bible college. I had read various books on Hinduism, but it was when I went to the villages of India that I saw something very different than the theoretical descriptions of Hinduism I had read about. If I was going to communicate the Christian gospel to the ordinary people, I needed to understand what they actually believed and make my message relevant to them. And this led me on to the study of cultural anthropology. In this workshop, I'm going to make contributions on 6 points that you can see outlined here. And the workshop will commence by looking at the idea of folk religion, how it emerged, and especially how there's a distinction between the great tradition and the little tradition in Buddhism. And we're going to begin by looking at the ideas of folk religion itself and the person of Robert Redfield. It was in the 1920s that Robert Redfield was undertaking anthropological study in the village life of Mexico as part of his PhD study with Chicago University. It became clear to him that although peasants in the villages were claiming to be Catholics, their actual beliefs and practices were radically different from those of the priests in the cities. Redfield made a study of 4 communities at various stages of contact with the modern world. And out of this came the thesis that was published in the 1930s. Redfield concluded that peasant society was not autonomous, but was part of this whole civilization. His model can best be seen in this way, that you had your traditional religion and society, into which came the great tradition, in this case Roman Catholicism, and the interaction between the two produced the little tradition. And Robert Redfield concludes, 2 currents of thought and action, distinguishable yet ever flowing into and out of each other. That's what you have going on with the little tradition and the great tradition. This dichotomy between high religion and low religion has become popular within Christian mission circles and is best sort of expressed in a chart like this. So with high religion, you've got doctrine, you've got teaching, you've got texts, literature is important, and you've got specialists who will talk about the philosophy. In contrast, with regards to low or folk religion, it is a matter of being religious or superstition. And the community is an oral community. And these are not specialists, but ordinary people. And they're more concerned about ritual and practice than they are with philosophy and ideas. With high religion, it tends to be followed by the elite, the royalty, and therefore tends to be regarded as something as universal for the whole of the empire, in fact, the whole of the world, and therefore is a missionary implication. On the other hand, with regards to folk religion, it's the religion of the powerless, the peasant, and it's much more localized and is not missionary in any major sense. This was further developed by Paul Hibbert in his model, looking at high religion, which is based on cosmic beings, on folk low religion, with its emphasis on gods and goddesses, and then you've got the folk social sciences, the technology. And his argument is that as Christian workers in these areas, we've approached the high religion, we've engaged with that in discussion, and we've engaged with sort of the folk technology to some extent. But this folk or low religion we have ignored. The local gods, the goddesses, the ancestors, the ghosts and the spirits are sort of been left out of our agenda. This is the excluded middle, as he writes about it. Now, let's look at how this applies to folk Buddhism. In an important study of folk Buddhism made by Gananatha Obereskya in his home country of Sri Lanka, you see many of these points. Obereskya concluded these things, 4 things. First, culture is integrated, so it is not possible to distinguish great from little religious tradition. The great tradition describes the intellectual thought and interests of civilization, and that's what we've looked at. It's literate, it's the elite, it's a matter of education. Whereas the little tradition is not just the religion of the peasants, it involves the whole of their culture, the way of life, how they farm. That becomes important, and it deals with spirits. So before ploughing in the field, they must make sure of giving sort of a gift to the spirit of the local area, so he or she is not upset by the land being turned over by the plough. But the little tradition is linked with the great tradition by many common idioms, many symbols, many terms that sort of relate one to another. In Buddhist thinking, this works out as follows. The Buddha lived in a society in which Brahmin priests and Hindu deities dominated. The Buddha never forbade the worship of these gods, but said they provided no release from the ultimate problem of life, which was suffering. In fact, the gods were part of this whole cycle of karma. However, because the Buddha had found the path to liberation, he was considered far greater than all. He was paramount in the whole hierarchy. So if you look at sort of a hierarchy of gods, it would be something in which the Buddha is in a presidential position. You have the guardian deities, the great gods of the world. For Sri Lanka, the protector of the island was actually the Hindu god Vishnu, who, according to tradition, the Buddha had allocated the task of looking after this particular island. There were also local gods and demons, and you needed to keep in favour with them because they could help you in many worldly affairs and actually punish people unless they were appeased. Then you've even got some local spirits, lesser ones, that sort of are just a nuisance. You can see this sort of hierarchy even in the architecture of the temples. When it comes to Sinhalese temple, you can see the main building being at the centre, and around it are certain smaller temples in which are the Hindu gods, the local gods, can be kept, and images of them will be on the walls or on the gateways. Here's an example of it. So you can see down at the far end here, you can see the main temple, where here is the entrance to the Dvala. You can also see this in the city of Katragama, which is a major pilgrimage centre in the south of Sri Lanka. The name Katragama comes from the Sanskrit deity Skanda, a son of the great Hindu god Shiva, and Skanda is regarded as the god of war. And not only is his statue here, but down this end you've got a statue hidden behind this screen, and there's just an image of Skanda. And these around are some of the priests who are leading in that particular temple. Katragama has become the centre of ecstatic priests displaying their devotion with long dreadlocks hanging down their backs, and they express their devotion to the gods through such things as fire walking, tongue piercing, and trance-induced prophecy for people who come to them. Here is a lay devotee fulfilling his vow. He'd come to Katragama with certain requests, and the god had fulfilled it, and so now he was fulfilling what he had promised. Now, in contrast to that, let's look at sort of the great tradition and what you see with the Sangha. The monastic community, known as the Sangha, emerged in India in the 6th century BC. At that time it was accepted practice that some men would leave their everyday life to seek release, moksha, and those who left to join the Buddha formed a community of the Sangha, which gradually established its own rules. The monks undertook meditation to quench the fires of desire and to reach the state of calm and ultimately enlightenment and release. In the Theravada, that's the southern tradition, the monastic practices were written out in the Tripitaka, the 3 baskets, in the Pali script. People and laity provide support for the monks, who in turn exemplify the life of the Dharma in their devotion. The way they've had their hair shaved. Notice how that compares with the dreadlocks of the priests at Katragama. The aims of the lay people is to live in such a way that they will have a better reincarnation. The great tradition usually receives royal patronage, and this is seen as a force to achieve unity in the kingdom. The supreme example in Buddhism is King Ashoka. King Ashoka established an empire that covered most of India. Initially, he was a violent man, but converted to Buddhism and adopted Buddhism as the moral basis of his empire. And he also drafted out key principles known as the Dharma Ashoka. And evidence of this is all over India, where you've got these sort of building projects, the texts, written seals telling of the story of King. This is the extent of Ashoka's empire in the 3rd century BC. Stretches from the south of India right up into what would be now Afghanistan. We're going to be looking at this later as being Gandhara. Each of these red pillars round here are monuments that remain even today, saying the work of King Ashoka. Emperor Ashoka also sent out missionaries to various areas of his empire and beyond. In the centre of Sri Lanka is one of the most important temples in the place known as Kandy, and here it contains one of the most important relics in the country. In it is located a very special relic that was sent to the country. Here in this golden casket is what is claimed to be the very tooth of the Buddha. You can see how this is making an appeal to the ordinary people through these relics. Now, in conclusion, you can see that in the teaching of the Buddha, it resulted in a monastic community, the Sangha, with its alternative way of life. This, within Buddhism, is your high religion. It's literate, it's got scholars, it's got temples, it's got royal patronage. On the other hand, lay people express their beliefs in terms of their existing beliefs of gods and powers, and dealing with the basics in human life. But in all of this, the Buddha is always seen as being paramount, a figure above all the gods and spirits. And this general pattern is going to be common through all that we see.